Poor old Bertie, who never in a million years dreamed that he would be flung into the public spotlight, goes through a pretty dark night of the soul about fronting up to that kind of public responsibility.
He was not equipped in his personality or suited being king in any way, and he knew it. It was more than just a stammer. He was terribly shy, he was underconfident. Physically, he wasn't that strong.
Yearning for a larger audience, are we, Bertie?
He doesn't have the sort of the flair and the confidence that his brother does. And so even prior to the abdication and prior to him having to become king, he's just sort of struggling with the world that he's in anyway.
I can cure your husband, but for my method to work, I need trust and total equality. Here in the safety of my consultation room.
When can you start?
He was a sort of failed, slightly amateur actor, more out of a passion for the language of Shakespeare. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Australia would have been a fairly unknown quantity in the 20s and 30s to most English people, and they probably had a slightly, shall we say, imperial attitude towards the Antipodeans.
I'm not hearing the cries of a deformed creature yearning to be king. Nor did I realize Richard III was king of the colonies.
I think the premise alone is pretty compelling. This unlikely relationship between a man who lives in this very lonely and rarefied existence and a man he's very unlikely to meet under any other circumstances.
Please. Call me Lionel.
I prefer Doctor.
I prefer Lionel. What'll I call you?
Your Royal Highness. Then Sir, after that.
How about Bertie?
He obviously feels he can't work effectively if he has to observe all those protocols, if he has to sit a certain distance from the person opposite him, if he has to bow and say Your Majesty or Your Royal Highness or Sir, and all that has to be going on, when in fact he has to break down a few barriers in order to be able to help this man.
I'm not here to discuss personal matters.
Why are you here then? He kind of pioneered an almost psychotherapeutic approach, that he knew the problem was not simply a physical one, that there was something, mostly around the age of 4 or 5, some kind of trauma within the child that creates stammering.
There was a technical side to it as well, but even that, I think, did something to help break down the formality of their relationship. I mean, it's very, very difficult to continue to keep a distance from somebody if you've been rolling around on the floor with them. Like all relationships which are meaningful, they're not smooth.
What are you doing?
Get up, you can't sit there, get up!
Why not? It's a chair.
No, that is not a chair, that is St. Edward's chair.
People have carved their names on it.
Chair is the seat on which every king
It's held
and
in place
queen...
by a large rock.
That is the stone of Scone. You are trivializing everything.
They have rows and they make it up again, and, you know, we've called it the bromance, which it is. It's a brotherly love story.
Colin's just delightful, you know. It's a thrill to share the screen with him and to watch him. You know, that's one of the great things about being an actor, is actually sort of being in front of other actors while they do their stuff and kind of going, wow. So he's got a really great sense of drama and what's entertaining. You know, there's a lot going on.
The role has enormous dimension and a lot of texture to it, because it's the journey towards becoming a king or becoming a human being in a funny sort of way. And watching him do that has been beautiful, heartbreaking, very powerful. He's just found this extraordinary variation, depending on who he's with as a character, you know, how debilitating or how frustrating the level of stammering can become.
I think he's risen to the challenge, and I think it's a truly great performance. This film stands or falls by the amount you care about this guy's fate. Colin's genius is the extent to which he allows you in and allows you to care for him and want him to succeed.
40 seconds, sir. Hello, everybody. Thank you. I know you're not clapping for me. I'm Matt Holzman from KCRW, and I'm really pleased. Thank you. Thank you very much. really pleased to be here tonight to moderate this Q&A for this fine movie. We've got the director and really a royal group of film and stage actors here for you tonight. So let's bring our cast out. Let's start with, as Queen Mary, Claire Bloom. As King Edward, Guy Pearce. As the director, Tom Hooper. As Queen Elizabeth, Helena Bonham Carter. And as King George VI, Colin Firth. I want to say thank you for an extraordinary film. You know, Tom, I just want to start with you. This is one of the greatest ensembles of all time, and that is clearly true. What was it like directing such incredible actors?
Well, I love actors, so to be... And you know, I remember the read-through where I sat at a table and had these wonderful 4 actors, as well as Geoffrey Rush, as well as Sir Michael Gambon, Sir Derek Jacobi, Anthony Andrews, Timothy Spall, Jennifer Ehle being reunited on screen for the first time with Colin since Pride and Prejudice. And the amount of cinematic and theatrical history in that rehearsal room was quite extraordinary. And as a director, I mean, you set your sights on certain actors you want to work with early. I mean, Helena, I set my sights on wanting to work with her when I was, I don't know, a teenager, and she was doing Room with a View. I was making Runaway Dog on my Clockwork Bolex camera, and but I said, you know, that I've got to work with her. Now it's taken me a little bit of time.
No, wait so long.
And even when it came to it, I still had to twist her arm a little bit. But one of the great pleasures is actors you've watched and admired for many years. We finally getting to work with them, and the ensemble in this film was just an utter joy.
Colin, I want to read a quote from the British Stammering Association. Yes. It says, Colin Firth does an incredibly realistic job of conveying how it is to be stuck in a block with no control over your speech. So, I'm sorry, it's such an obvious question, but how did you decide to portray the stammer in the way that you did?
It's a feat of the imagination, I suppose. It's all you've got. You can harvest all the information that's available, which is just what other people tell you. You can listen to people who struggle with it. There are an awful lot of experts on how not to stutter. There are books written that help people not to stutter, but there is not a lot of information on how to stutter. And no experts.
You could write it.
Yes, I may be the sole authority.
Be a good tie-in, merchandise. Come on, Harvey.
It's our writer, David Seidler, had struggled through his childhood and much of his life with that problem, and this is what inspired him to write this. And although he didn't really attempt to tell me what was going on technically with George VI, he was able to give me a very rich and disturbing picture of what the experience was. He talked about the sensation of being underwater, you know, and that drowning, that image of drowning, helped me actually, because I felt I sensed something of that in George VI, in some of the footage that Tom and I watched of George VI at his worst, when he really hits the block and goes into this abject silence, which we both found heartbreaking. And you do see, and be like an infant or like an animal. There's just no way you can use that fundamental human faculty of language. It's not an option. And it must feel like an eternity when you're in it. So just looking at that gave me a lot of information about what I was aiming at. We did have a lady come in one day and talk a little bit about the technical things that happen, what happens in the throat, what happens in the front of the mouth, that sort of thing. But you know, and Tom was incredibly valuable to me in terms of almost scoring it and how much we felt we could afford to portray in the film. And with Tom, it was basically more. You know, I found it quite a struggle to do it, and I was worried that we were possibly in danger of alienating people if we did too much.
Just because it's so painful to watch?
Well, yes, I mean, it's something that has to be judged very carefully. I mean, if you sell it short, then the stakes are very low, and you don't feel that Lionel has really got anything at stake. There's no issue, you know.
Also could slow the movie down quite a lot.
Well, there's the danger that the movie could last 4 hours, yes.
Yes.
There's also a question of, you know, the movie has humor, it has pace, it does all that sort of thing. And also, Helena had a home to go to, which she made very clear. You know, the supportive wife here. So basically, when Tom said, "I want you to stammer on every line," I was, you know, fairly mortified with the thought, but Helena went white as a sheet. But,
well, it's harder for her because, you know, what is acting but reacting, and she had to react for a long time because he kept stammering. Did you actually come up with a couple of different kind of versions of what the stammer would sound like and discuss it with Tom and the cast, or did you nail it the first time?
No, I mean, I think once we listened to him, we made a decision.
Right.
You know, it is specific to people. It isn't just one sound, and sometimes you get it represents itself as a repetition. In other cases such as this, it's just a block. And it was quite clear that that's what we were listening to.
Helena, you had a fascinating role to play because you have to play both a queen who is cool and calm and composed, and you also play a wife who is incredibly loving and supportive. I mean, and it seemed to me it would have been very easy to come off a little bit sociopathic, you know, because they really are two totally separate characters in a way.
Are they?
Well, I think that I don't expect...
Well, I will say, okay, my one take on the Queen one, because the thing is, if you get to play her, there's a hell of a lot to get through. There's about 5 inches of biography. I only had about 3 weeks, so I'm not great at speed reading. So, but there was one sentence that made sense to me, which was, I think it was Cecil Beaton, and he said that she was a marshmallow, but made with a welding machine. And that was, I just suddenly thought, thank God I got something to play.
Is that the only sentence that made sense to you in the 5 inches?
I told you I wasn't high functioning. So anyway, that was big highlight. I thought, oh great, I don't have to read the rest, got it. And so what I'm saying is that there was a public front that she hid behind, and that sort of sweetness and that head cocked did my neck in many, many times. But that sweetness that she projected was a real front under which she could operate.
This is for Guy from Facebook. It doesn't say who, but it says, this is not a question, it's a statement, but I'll say it anyway. Last year, you were in the Hurt Locker. I think you're aware of that.
Yes.
Are you...
Was that the question?
No. Are you good luck in your films? Are you planning to make an appearance in the Best Picture films every year?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, let's move on.
Hugely in demand, this man.
Really?
For 5 minutes in the Best Picture film from now on.
I cast him entirely as a lucky charm.
You don't have any lines. You're just going to sit on the stage and look.
I was in The Godfather too, but really just for a minute in the wedding scene, and you really don't even know that I'm there.
Yes.
I was quite young.
You were wonderful, I thought. It seemed like you had to play this very kind of fine line between kind of, well, the relationship is a very complicated one. In some ways, he sees his brother as his way out, and he also wants to let his brother know that he's better in some ways, or, you know, tell me more about that relationship. Yes.
Well, on some level, I don't know that it's that unusual, a relationship, really. I mean, everything that we read about these two sort of indicated that, I mean, they were only, how many years apart were they, really? 2 or 3, I think?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, so they were really quite close. And I think they, you know, relied on each other the way that brothers did. And I think the situation that we see where I sort of imitate the stutter in front of Bertie had actually happened a number of times.
So people had witnessed him do that.
Yes, sure, I think he'd also done it when they were, very young as well, as sort of brothers do. So I don't really see it as a particularly unusual relationship.
The stakes are higher, I guess.
Well, the stakes are higher, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure whether in growing up, really whether Edward made it clear that he never really wanted to be king, and that in the background of Bertie's mind was the possibility that he would one day be king. I'm not really sure when that became very clear to Bertie, to be honest.
Only at the very last minute. I mean, it had no precedent. This is never, no English king had ever abdicated.
No, I'm sure that even if Bertie thought to himself, well, thank God David's the one that's
yes,
going to take the reins.
The older brother trying to push the younger brother trying to push the older brother off the throne, positively medieval, is actually a quote from a letter from David to Bertie. David, I think, had just gone abroad, and it was a joke.
That's right.
But while he was away, I don't know whether Bertie was sort of taking up some sort of responsibility, but that was definitely alive in his mind, at least from a humorous point of view.
In The New Yorker, Anthony Lane calls Queen Mary, I love this quote, about as warm and tender as a submarine filled with sorbet. And I'm wondering how do you prepare to portray a submarine filled with sorbet?
That's not what you play.
Yes.
I think you could easily say they were a dysfunctional family.
You could easily say that, yes.
And she particularly, there's a very good film called The Lost Prince, a subject I didn't know about at all, where Miranda Richardson plays much younger Queen Mary most wonderfully. And she had a child, one of her sons was an epileptic. And in those days, that for a royal family to produce a faulty son or child was, you couldn't countenance it. He was hidden. It apparently had a terrible effect on her, and I think froze her. I mean, nobody's born frozen.
Right.
And I would imagine that a most unhappy marriage. I can't think of anything much worse than being married to George V, frankly. And probably neither could she.
Right. Well, at the point when Edward hugs her, and that pained look on her face is a remarkable scene, because it's a woman who really does not know what to do.
Simply doesn't know how to behave, how to react as a human being from one to the other, and is frightened, as I think, I don't say anymore, but the English were, of open emotion. And it was very raw emotion.
Right, very.
No.
I apologize for asking you this question, because I'm sure it's something that is asked of you every time you appear, but obviously you work with the great Charlie Chaplin. What was it like to work with him?
It was so extraordinary. He was a wonderful man, a wonderful mentor, marvelous colleague. I mean, I was 19. He was 61. I thought that was ancient. And never treated me as anything other than as though I was a professional actress, which I'd only really just become. And I still consider myself the luckiest person in the world to have been plucked from nowhere to become Chaplin's leading lady. It still seems extraordinary.
He was very lucky to find you.
Well, it was lucky for me. It opened a whole life.
Tom, this is a time in English royal history that has just been picked over with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm wondering, why have we not heard the story before? And how did you find it?
Well, because the English traditionally have not been highly welcoming to the need for therapy. And so you can imagine a story about a king needing a therapist, and that therapist being Australian was something that was put into the footnotes of the history books and was quite marginalised. And if you'd Googled Lionel Logue 2 years ago, I think you got 2 hits. Little different now. But really, we knew very little about Lionel Logue. In fact, when we started, Geoffrey Rush was desperate to know what he looked like, or find a photograph of him, and we had no photographs. We didn't know his kids' names. We knew very little. And David Seidler, the writer, had effectively had to
sort of invent Lionel Logue. And then the turning point came 9 weeks before the shoot, when we tracked down the grandson of Lionel Logue, living in London, 10 minutes from where I live. And, and in his attic was a handwritten diary account of his grandfather's relationship with the king, which no historian knew existed, no royal biographer has ever read, no member of the royal family had ever seen. And 9 weeks before the shoot, we had this treasure trove in our hands. And few of the best lines of dialogue, 5 or 6, are written by King George VI and Lionel Logue. And I'll give you an example. At the end of the big speech, Lionel turns to the king and says, "You still stammered on the W." And the king says, "Well, I had to throw in a few so they knew it was me." Those lines are written by King George VI and Lionel Logue.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you on the web for watching. And thank you so, so much to Claire Bloom, to Guy Pearce, to Tom Hooper, Helena Bonham Carter, and Colin Firth. Thank you all for being here and for a wonderful movie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
very much.
you. Night, night.
Thank you.
We should all give a national